I'm Kara Vance, 42, and I built a multi-million-dollar logistics empire from the ground up to ensure my son, Leo, would never want for anything. The champagne flute in my hand felt heavy, grounded, the only real thing in a room swirling with artificial adulation. I stood on the raised dais of the Grand Hotel ballroom, the lights dazzling against the sequins of 300 gowns. This was the night I had worked 20 years for. The Vance Logistics Charity Gala wasn't just a party, it was my coronation. I looked down at the front table, the one reserved for family. My 19-year-old son Leo sat there fidgeting with his cufflinks. He looked so much like his father in that tuxedo, it made my chest ache with a familiar, dull throb. He caught my eye and offered a shy, lopsided smile. I raised my glass to him, mouthing the words "I love you." He ducked his head, embarrassed, but I saw the pride in his eyes. Everything I did, every contract I negotiated, every competitor I crushed, I did it for him. I wanted him to have the softness I never had. I stepped up to the microphone, the feedback whining for a split second before silence fell over the room. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady, practiced. "Tonight isn't just about business, it's about legacy." The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open with a violence that shook the floorboards. I stopped mid-sentence. The silence in the room shifted from respectful to terrified. A dozen uniformed officers marched in, flanked by two detectives in cheap suits. The juxtaposition was jarring, the grim, gray reality of the police against the gold-leaf opulence of my world. I gripped the podium, my knuckles turning white. I assumed they were here for me. In my line of work, navigating international shipping lanes, you make enemies. I assumed it was a raid on the company, a misunderstanding about tariffs or customs. My mind was already racing through my list of attorneys, preparing my statement. But they didn't look at me. They walked right past the stage. They marched through the center aisle, parting the sea of donors like a dark wedge. I watched, confused, as they headed straight for the front table. My heart stopped. They were surrounding Leo. "No," I whispered, the microphone picking it up and broadcasting my fear to the entire room. I dropped the champagne glass. It shattered, the sound like a gunshot, but nobody flinched because the detective had just grabbed Leo by the shoulder. I abandoned the podium, jumping down the 3 steps in my heels, nearly twisting my ankle. I didn't care. I ran toward them. "Get your hands off him," I screamed, my voice raw, unrecognizable. Leo stood up, his chair clattering backward. His face was drained of all color, his eyes wide, terrified saucers fixed on mine. "Mom," he squeaked. He sounded 5 years old. "Step back, ma'am," the lead detective barked, positioning his body between me and my son. "That is my son," I yelled, trying to shove past the detective's bulk. "You have no right. What is this?" The detective didn't even look at me, he was focused entirely on Leo. He spun my boy around. I saw the flash of metal. I heard the ratcheting click of handcuffs tightening over Leo's wrists. The sound made me physically ill. "Leo Vance," the detective droned, his voice flat, "you are under arrest." "For what?" I shrieked, grabbing the detective's arm. "He's a child. He hasn't done anything." The detective finally looked at me, his eyes cold and tired. "For the vehicular manslaughter of Sarah Jenkins," he said. The world tilted on its axis. The air left the room. I felt like I was underwater. "What?" I gasped. That's impossible." "Hit and run," the detective continued, reciting the nightmare. "Occurred last night between 2 and 3 a.m. We found the car matching the debris in your garage, Mrs. Vance. The hood is smashed. There's blood on the fender." "No," I shook my head, my hair flying wild. "No, you're wrong, you're incompetent. Leo was home last night." I remembered it vividly. I had come home late from the office around 1 in the morning. I had walked past his room. The door was cracked open. I had peeked inside. I saw the lump in his bed, the rhythm of his breathing under the duvet. I saw his messy hair on the pillow. I checked on him. I screamed at the detective, tears finally spilling over, hot and stinging. He was asleep in his bed. He never left the house. The traffic cams say otherwise, ma'am, the detective said, shoving Leo forward. Leo wasn't fighting. He was limp, dead weight, letting them drag him. Leo, I cried out, reaching for him again. Leo, tell them you were home. Leo looked at me, and for a second, I saw something in his eyes that terrified me more than the police. It wasn't innocence, it was resignation. He didn't say a word. The crowd was murmuring now, hundreds of phones raised, recording my destruction. I felt a hand clamp down on my shoulder. It was hard, painful. I spun around, ready to strike whoever it was. It was Marcus, my personal attorney and fixer. His face was pale, his jaw set like granite. Kara, he hissed, his voice low and urgent. Do something, Marcus, I begged, grabbing his lapels. They're taking him, they're lying. Marcus pulled me close, his grip bruising. He leaned into my ear, ignoring the cameras, ignoring the police dragging my son toward the exit. Stop screaming, Marcus commanded, his voice shaking with a fear I had never heard from him before. Marcus, that's my son. I know, he whispered harshly. But you need to listen to me right now. I just got the call from the precinct before they walked in. The evidence, Kara, the evidence is overwhelming. I don't care about evidence. I sobbed, watching Leo disappear through the double doors, the flashing blue lights swallowing him whole. I saw him sleeping. Marcus squeezed my arm, forcing me to look at him. Kara, shut up, he warned, his eyes darting to the nearest police officer. Don't say another word, don't tell them you saw him, don't tell them anything. Why? I choked out. Because, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, if you say you saw him sleeping and they prove he was driving, then you aren't just a mother anymore. I stared at him, my blood running cold. You're an accomplice, he finished. Don't speak to anyone, not the police, not the press, and for God's sake, do not speak to Leo until I get there. I looked back at the empty doorway where my son had just vanished. My empire was still standing, but my life had just ended. Marcus didn't guide me out of the ballroom, he hauled me. His fingers dug into the tender flesh of my upper arm, forcing me through the service exit. The heavy door swung shut, severing the noise of the gala like a guillotine blade. The sudden silence was ringing in my ears. We were in a narrow, concrete hallway that smelled of floor wax and stale garbage. I stumbled, my heels skidding on the linoleum. Let go of me, I gasped, trying to wrench my arm free. Marcus didn't stop. He marched me down the corridor, past confused catering staff holding trays of canapés that would never be eaten. He shoved open a door marked private and pushed me inside. It was a windowless security office. Banks of monitors covered one wall, showing the chaos I had just left behind in the ballroom. I saw the guests milling about like ants in a disturbed hill. I saw the empty space where my son had been. Marcus slammed the door and locked it. The click of the deadbolt echoed like a gunshot in the small, sterile room. I spun around, my chest heaving, adrenaline flooding my veins with a sour, metallic taste. Have you lost your mind? I screamed at him. My son is in a police car. I need to be with him. I reached for the door handle. Marcus slammed his hand against the wood, inches from my face. I flinched, backing up until my spine hit the cold edge of a metal desk. I had known Marcus Thorne for 10 years. He was the most expensive defense attorney in the city, a man who wore Italian silk suits and possessed a smile that could charm a verdict out of a stone. He was never rattled, he was never messy. But right now, the man standing in front of me was terrifying. His face was slick with a sheen of sweat. His eyes were wide, darting around the room as if checking for listening devices. "You are not going to the police station," he said, his voice a low, vibrating hiss. "Not yet. Are you insane?" I reached into my clutch for my phone. "I'm calling the station. I'm calling the commissioner. I know him, Marcus. I can fix this." Marcus moved faster than I thought possible. He snatched the phone out of my hand. "Hey," I lunged for it. He held it above his head, backing away from me. "Give me my phone, Marcus." "No," he barked. He looked down at the device, his thumb hovering over the screen. He powered it off, then he shoved it into his own jacket pocket. I stared at him, my mouth agape, a cold dread pooling in my stomach. "You just stole my property," I whispered. "You're fired." "You can't fire me," Marcus said, stepping into my personal space until I could smell the fear on him, a scent of bitter coffee and nervous sweat. "Because I'm the only thing standing between you and a life sentence." He gripped my shoulders. His hands were trembling. "Listen to me, Kara," he said, forcing me to look him in the eye. "You need to understand the gravity of what is happening. This isn't a traffic violation. This isn't a misunderstanding." "He was sleeping," I cried, the tears returning. "I told you I saw him." "Stop saying that," Marcus shouted, shaking me once hard. My head snapped back. I went rigid with shock. "Do not say that to me," he lowered his voice to a menacing whisper. "Do not say that to the police. Do not whisper it to your reflection in the mirror." "Why?" I pleaded, my voice breaking. "It's the truth. It's my alibi for him." "It is not an alibi," Marcus spat. "It is a trap." He let go of me and began pacing the small room, running a hand through his perfectly gelled hair, ruining it. "I saw the warrant, Kara," he said, turning back to me. "I saw the preliminary forensics report before the ink was dry. They have the car. They have the GPS data. They have traffic cam footage of a male matching Leo's description driving your Mercedes into that girl at 60 miles an hour." "It's faked," I insisted, wrapping my arms around myself to stop the shivering. "Someone stole the car." "The keys were in your safe," Marcus countered instantly. "No forced entry to the garage. Leo's fingerprints are on the wheel, fresh ones." The room spun. I grabbed the edge of the desk to stay upright. "That's impossible," I whispered. "It doesn't matter what's possible," Marcus said, leaning in close again. "It matters what they can prove. And right now, they can prove he did it." He took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "If you go down there and tell them you checked on him at 1 in the morning, Marcus said slowly, enunciating every syllable, "and they prove he killed that girl at 2:30. Do you know what that makes you?" I stared at him, unable to speak. "It makes you a liar," he said. "It destroys your credibility, but worse. If you say you knew he was home, and they find evidence you helped him clean up. Or that you knew about the car." "I didn't." "It doesn't matter." Marcus slammed his fist on the desk. "They will charge you with obstruction. They will charge you as an accessory." He paused, his expression darkening. "But that's not why I took your phone." I looked at his pocket, the outline of my device visible against the fabric. "Then why?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Marcus looked at the door, then back at me. The fear in his eyes shifted. It wasn't legal panic anymore. It was personal terror. "Because the district attorney didn't sign off on this raid," Marcus whispered. I frowned, confused. "Who did?" "The Attorney General's office pushed it through directly," Marcus said. My heart stopped beating. "The Attorney General, Julian." The name rose in my throat like bile. Julian Vance, my ex-husband, Leo's father. The man I had spent 15 years running from, hiding from, building a fortress of money and influence to protect my son from. "He's behind this?" I asked, the blood draining from my face. He's not just behind it, Marcus said, his voice trembling. He orchestrated it, the timing, the gala, the public arrest. He wanted to humiliate you, Kara. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to a terrified thread. I know Julian, Marcus said. I know how he operates. He has been waiting for you to slip up. He has been waiting for Leo to slip up. I felt sick. I felt the walls of the tiny room closing in on me. He's trying to take Leo, I realized, the horror dawning on me. He's using this to get custody, to get control. He's trying to destroy you, Marcus corrected. If you speak to the police, Julian will get the transcripts. If you speak to the press, Julian will spin it. Marcus grabbed my wrists, his grip painful. Every word you utter is a bullet, Kara, he said. And Julian will pick them up, load them into his gun, and use them to bury us both. I looked at Marcus, really looked at him. I saw the way his left eye twitched. I realized then that my high-priced, invincible lawyer was scared to death of my ex-husband. He'll come for me too, Marcus whispered. If I screw this up, if I let you talk, he'll ruin me just for the sport of it. He released my wrists. So you are going to sit in this room, Marcus commanded. You are going to keep your mouth shut. You are not going to call anyone. You are not going to cry to the detectives. He walked to the door and put his hand on the lock. I am going to the station to stop them from interrogating Leo, he said. I will do my job, but you have to do yours. What is my job? I asked, my voice hollow. Silence, Marcus said, absolute silence, or you will never see your son as a free man again. He unlocked the door and slipped out. I was left alone in the windowless room. The hum of the monitors was the only sound. I looked at the screens. I saw the empty ballroom. I saw the shattered glass of champagne on the floor. My empire was still standing, but the foundation had rotted away in a single heartbeat. Julian was here, and he had my son. I'm Kara Sterling, 44 years old, and I built a logistics empire that moves half the country's freight across the Atlantic. Marcus thought a locked door would stop me. He thought stripping me of my phone would render me helpless. He underestimated the desperation of a mother who smells smoke in her own house. I stared at the heavy metal door he had just bolted. My reflection in the darkened security monitors looked like a stranger. My hair was wild, my mascara smeared, my chest heaving beneath a gown that cost more than most people's cars. I didn't scream. I didn't bang on the door. I looked at the ceiling. Drop tiles. I kicked off my heels. I dragged the metal desk across the linoleum, the screech of steel on the floor setting my teeth on edge. I climbed up, my muscles trembling from the adrenaline crash. I pushed a tile aside, darkness. I pulled myself up, ignoring the scrape of raw concrete against my bare arms. I crawled through the dusty plenum space over the wall and dropped down into the adjacent corridor. I landed hard on my knees. Pain shot up my legs, but I forced myself to stand. I was out. I exited the hotel through the kitchen loading dock, bypassing the paparazzi swarming the front entrance like sharks sensing blood in the water. The night air hit me like a physical blow. It was humid, thick with the scent of exhaust and coming rain. I didn't have my phone to call a driver. I didn't have my security detail. I ran to the main avenue and flagged down a beat-up yellow taxi, waving $100 bill I had fished from my clutch. The municipal impound lot, I told the driver. Fast! He looked at me in the rearview mirror, a barefoot woman in a ruined gala gown holding cash. He didn't ask questions, he just drove. The city blurred past my window, a streak of neon lights and shadows. My mind was a chaotic storm. Marcus's words echoed in my skull. Julian is behind this, the Attorney General. My ex-husband had waited 15 years to strike, and he had chosen the moment when I was most vulnerable. He wasn't just coming for Leo. He was coming to burn down everything I had built. The taxi dropped me a block away from the impound lot. It was a desolate stretch of industrial wasteland under the highway overpass. Chain link fences topped with razor wire loomed in the darkness. Floodlights buzzed, casting long skeletal shadows across rows of confiscated vehicles. I waited until the guard in the booth turned his head to watch a portable TV. I moved into the shadows. I found a spot where the heavy rains had washed away the dirt beneath the fence. It was a tight squeeze. I lay on my back in the mud. I pushed myself under the steel mesh. The wire snagged on the silk of my dress, tearing it with a sound like a gasp. I didn't care. I dragged myself through the muck, the smell of oil and rust filling my nose. I stood up on the other side, shivering. I was inside. I began to walk down the rows of cars, my bare feet sinking into the gravel. There were hundreds of them. Smashed sedans, rusted trucks, motorcycles twisted into abstract shapes of violence. It was a graveyard of mistakes. I scanned the lot, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I needed to find it. I needed to see the damage with my own eyes. Then I saw the glint of silver under a flickering halogen light. Row G, my Mercedes. I stopped breathing. The car was a ruin. The front hood was buckled like an accordion. The windshield was a spiderweb of shattered glass. The passenger side headlight was gone. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a sob. It looked violent. It looked like a weapon. Leo, I thought, a fresh wave of nausea rolling over me. What did you do? I approached the car slowly as if it were a sleeping beast that might wake up and bite me. Yellow police tape was slapped haphazardly across the driver's side door. Evidence. I ducked under the tape. I tried the handle, locked, of course. I looked around the ground. I found a heavy, rusted piece of rebar. I wrapped the remnants of my silk shawl around my hand. I looked at the rear passenger window. I swung the rebar. Crack. The safety glass shattered into thousands of diamonds, raining onto the leather seats. I reached in and unlocked the door. I climbed into the back seat, the glass crunching under my knees. The car smelled of airbags, that distinctive, acrid scent of burnt chemical powder. I scrambled over the center console into the front seat. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control them. I looked at the rearview mirror. The police had dusted for prints. I could see the black powder smeared on the dashboard. They had taken the GPS unit. They had taken the contents of the glove box. But they had missed the one thing that mattered. They had missed the thing Julian didn't know about. 3 years ago, after a kidnapping scare, I had installed a localized, encrypted security system in all my vehicles. It wasn't a standard dash cam. It was a tiny, high-definition lens embedded in the base of the rearview mirror housing, designed to look like a rain sensor. It didn't upload to the cloud. I didn't trust the cloud. It recorded to a micro SD card hidden behind a pressure plate. I reached up to the mirror. My fingers fumbled with the plastic casing. "Come on," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Come on." I dug my fingernail into the hidden groove. Click. A small panel popped open. There it was, the black edge of the memory card. I pinched it between my thumb and forefinger and pulled. It slid out. I held it up to the light. This tiny square of plastic held the truth. It held the last 3 hours of my son's life. It would show me if he was driving. It would show me if he hit that girl. It would show me if Marcus was right, if my son was a killer. Or it would show me if I was being framed. I clutched the card to my chest, closing my eyes tight. Suddenly, a beam of light swept across the interior of the car. "Hey!" a voice shouted from the distance. "Who's in there?" The guard. I froze. "I see you," the voice boomed, closer this time. The beam of the flashlight cut through the shattered window, blinding me for a second. Panic exploded in my chest. I couldn't be found here. If they caught me, I would be tampering with evidence. I would be handing Julian the ammunition he needed to bury me. I shoved the SD card into my bra, the sharp plastic cold against my skin. I kicked the door open. "Stop!" the guard yelled. I didn't stop. I ran. I scrambled out of the car, ignoring the glass slicing into my feet. I sprinted toward the perimeter fence, the mud sucking at my steps. The beam of the flashlight danced wildly around me. I could hear the heavy thud of the guard's boots on the gravel. I hit the fence at full speed. I didn't go under this time. I climbed. I grabbed the chain links, hauling myself up, the metal biting into my palms. "Get down!" the guard screamed. I threw my leg over the top, narrowly missing the razor wire. I dropped to the sidewalk on the other side. My ankle twisted, but I forced myself to keep moving. I ran into the darkness of the underpass, my breath tearing at my throat. I didn't stop running until the impound lot was a distant glow behind me. I collapsed against a graffiti-covered wall, sliding down until I hit the pavement. I was covered in mud. I was bleeding. I was a fugitive in my own city, but I reached into my dress and pulled out the card. I held it tight. I had the truth. Now I just had to survive long enough to watch it. I'm Kara Sterling, 44 years old, and until tonight I believed there were lines even a monster wouldn't cross. I stood in the center of my executive suite, the city skyline glowing indifferently through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind me. I didn't turn on the lights. I couldn't risk being seen. I was a shadow in my own kingdom. My feet were bleeding, leaving faint, dark smears on the plush carpet. My dress was torn to shreds, caked with mud and grease from the impound lot. I smelled like diesel and fear. But my hand was clenched tight around the tiny piece of black plastic that burned against my palm. The micro SD card. I moved to my desk, my legs heavy as lead. I sat down in my leather chair, the familiar creak sounding like a gunshot in the silence. I opened my laptop. The screen flared to life, the blue light harsh against my eyes. I pulled a card reader from my top drawer. My fingers were trembling so violently it took me 3 tries to slot the card in. Click. The computer chimed. A folder appeared on the desktop. DCIM. I double-clicked. A list of video files populated the screen. They were time-stamped. I scrolled to the bottom. Today's date, 3 hours ago. My heart slammed against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that echoed in my ears. This was it. This was the moment that would define the rest of my life. This was the moment I found out if I had raised a killer. I hovered the cursor over the file. I closed my eyes for a second, whispering a prayer to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. Please, let it be an accident. Please, let him be innocent. I clicked play. The video opened in a grainy, high-contrast window. The angle was wide, capturing the interior of the Mercedes from the rearview mirror. It showed the driver's seat. It showed the passenger seat. It showed the road ahead through the windshield. The time stamp in the corner read 8:42 p.m. The car was stationary at first. Then the driver's door opened. A figure slid into the seat. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath catching in my throat. He was wearing a gray hoodie, the hood pulled up. He was wearing the vintage leather jacket I had bought Leo for his birthday. My stomach dropped. It was Leo's build. It was Leo's jacket. He started the car. The engine purred to life, a low rumble that vibrated through the laptop speakers. He shifted into gear. His hands gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2. I paused the video. I stared at the hands. They were wearing driving gloves. Black leather. Leo didn't wear driving gloves. I frowned, a cold prickle of unease dancing down my spine. I pressed play. The car moved onto the avenue. The driving was aggressive, too aggressive. Leo was a hesitant driver. He had only had his license for 6 months. He took corners too wide. He braked too early. But this driver handled the heavy sedan with the precision of a surgeon. He wove through traffic, accelerating into tight gaps, running yellow lights with calculated arrogance. I watched the minutes tick by on the timestamp. 8:55 p.m. The car turned onto 5th Street. This was where it happened. The street was lined with parked cars and upscale bistros. Pedestrians were blurring shapes on the sidewalk. The car accelerated. The speedometer readout at the bottom of the frame climbed. 40 mph, 50 mph, 60 mph in a 25 zone. Slow down, I whispered to the screen, tears stinging my eyes. Leo, slow down. Then I saw her, a girl in a white coat, stepping off the curb at the crosswalk. She was looking at her phone. She didn't see the car coming. My hands flew to my mouth. I expected the driver to swerve away. I expected the frantic jerk of the wheel, the desperate slam of the brakes. I expected the panic of a teenager making a mistake. That's not what happened. The driver didn't brake. He didn't swerve away. He adjusted his grip on the wheel. He turned it toward her. He aimed the car like a weapon. I gasped, a strangled sound that tore from my throat. The impact was sickeningly loud, a thud that made the camera shake violently. The windshield cracked. The girl disappeared from view. The car didn't stop. It kept going, speeding up, turning down an alleyway 2 blocks later. The driver killed the engine. Silence filled the office again, but the video was still running. The driver sat there for a moment, his chest rising and falling in a calm, steady rhythm. He wasn't hyperventilating. He wasn't crying. He reached up to the visor. He pulled it down. A street lamp outside the alley flickered, casting a beam of yellow light through the shattered windshield. It illuminated the driver's face for a split second. I hit the spacebar. Pause. I zoomed in. My blood turned to ice. The face was Leo's. The jawline, the nose, the sweep of blonde hair peeking out from the hood. But the eyes were wrong. They were dead, flat, and there was something else. At the edge of the jaw, right where the neck met the ear, the skin rippled. It didn't move like flesh. It buckled like rubber. I stared at the screen, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. I zoomed in further until the pixels blurred. There was a seam, a faint, almost invisible line running down the side of the neck. It was a mask, a high-end cinematic prosthetic. The kind used in big-budget movies. The kind that cost thousands of dollars and required a professional to apply. I felt the room spin. The driver reached up with a gloved hand and tugged at the chin. The face peeled away. Underneath the silicone skin of my son was another face. Sharp cheekbones, cold reptilian eyes, a mouth set in a grim line of satisfaction. I knew that face better than my own. I had woken up next to that face for 10 years. I had watched that face lie to the press, lie to juries, and lie to me. It was Julian, my ex-husband, the Attorney General of the state. He wasn't just covering up a crime. He had committed it. He had put on a mask of our son's face. He had worn our son's clothes. He had stolen my car. And he had hunted down an innocent girl to frame his own child. I pushed my chair back, scrambling away from the desk as if the laptop were radioactive. I fell to my knees on the carpet, bile rising in my throat. I retched, my body convulsing with shock. It was a ritual. It wasn't an accident. It was an execution designed to destroy Leo and me in one stroke. He knew about the dash cams. He knew the police would check them. He wanted them to see Leo hitting that girl. He wanted the video to leak. He wanted the world to see a rich, spoiled kid killing a pedestrian. But he didn't know about this camera. He didn't know about the backup system that recorded to the SD card instead of the cloud. He thought he was invisible. I stared at the frozen image of Julian's face, half hidden by the mask of our son. The fear in my chest evaporated. The sadness vanished. In their place, something else ignited. Something hot and dark and infinite. Rage, pure nuclear rage. I stood up. I wiped the vomit from my mouth with the back of my hand. I looked at my reflection in the window, wild hair, torn dress, eyes burning with a fire that could consume cities. Julian had made a mistake. He thought he was playing chess with a mother. He thought he was breaking a woman. He forgot who I was. I'm Kara Sterling. I move mountains for a living. And now I was going to drop one on him. I'm Kara Sterling, 44 years old, and I was holding the digital evidence that proved my ex-husband framed our son for murder. The rage I felt wasn't hot anymore. It was cold. It was a glacial, unmoving thing that sharpened my vision and steadied my hands. I ejected the micro SD card from the reader. I didn't trust my pockets. I didn't trust my purse. I grabbed a roll of clear packing tape from my desk drawer. I hiked up the hem of my ruined dress. I taped the tiny black square directly to the skin of my inner thigh. It burned against my flesh, a jagged little secret that could topple the most powerful man in the state. I needed to move. I couldn't go to the police. Julian owned the police. The precinct captain was a guest at our wedding. I needed the district attorney, Eleanor Hayes. She was the only one Julian hadn't managed to buy, bully, or blackmail yet. If I could get this video to her, if I could show her the mask, the gloves, the calculated evil in Julian's eyes, it would be over. I grabbed my laptop. I didn't bother with shoes. My bare feet slapped against the cold marble of the hallway as I sprinted toward the elevator. I pressed the button. I waited. Every second felt like an hour. The ding of the elevator arrival made me jump. I stepped inside, my reflection in the polished brass doors looking like a woman deranged. My hair was a rat's nest. There was dried mud on my cheek, but my eyes were clear. I hit the lobby button. I was going to end this. Tonight the doors slid open. The lobby of my building was quiet, the night shift security guard dozing behind the desk. I pushed through the revolving doors and into the humid city air. Sirens wailed in the distance. They sounded like warnings. I raised my hand to hail a taxi. A black sedan pulled up to the curb instantly. It wasn't a taxi. It moved with the aggressive silence of a shark. The rear window rolled down, but no one looked out. Instead, the passenger door opened. A man stepped out. He wasn't a cop. He was wearing a cheap suit that fit him poorly, and he held a thick manila envelope in his hand like a weapon. He blocked my path. Kara Sterling? He asked. His voice was flat, bored. Move, I snapped, trying to step around him. I'm in a hurry. He mirrored my movement, blocking me again. You've been served, he said. He thrust the envelope against my chest. I didn't take it. He let it drop. It hit the pavement with a heavy slap. By order of the Superior Court, he recited, stepping back toward the car. Consider yourself notified. He got back in the sedan. It peeled away before I could even blink. I looked down at the envelope lying in the gutter. A sick feeling curled in my stomach. I shouldn't touch it. I should leave it there and run to the DA. But I knew Julian. He didn't make moves that could be ignored. I crouched down. My fingers trembled as I picked up the packet. I tore the seal. I pulled out the documents under the harsh glow of the street lamp. XPARTE order, temporary restraining order and gag order. I scanned the legalese, my heart hammering against my ribs until it hurt. It was signed by Judge Vance. Of course, Vance was Julian's fraternity brother. I read the terms, my breath hitched. Prohibited from discussing the ongoing investigation with any third party, including media, law enforcement, or public officials. Prohibited from disseminating, sharing, or displaying any evidence related to the minor child, Leo Sterling. Violation will result in immediate incarceration for contempt of court. Immediate seizure of all assets, including Sterling Logistics and all associated bank accounts. I stopped reading. The words swam before my eyes. It was a trap. A perfect steel-jawed trap. Julian knew I would find something. He didn't know I had the video of the mask, he couldn't know that, but he knew me. He knew I would fight, so he cut out my tongue. If I walked into the DA's office right now and showed her that video, I would be arrested for violating a court order before she could even press play. I would be thrown in a cell. My assets would be frozen. I wouldn't be able to pay for Leo's defense. I wouldn't be able to hire experts. I would be neutralized. And the video, it would be buried as inadmissible evidence obtained in violation of a court order. I stood there on the sidewalk, the envelope crushing in my grip. He had checkmated me. I looked up at the massive screen mounted on the side of the news building across the street. The ticker tape was red, breaking news. The screen cut to a live feed. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was Julian. He was standing at a podium, dozens of microphones thrust in his face. He looked impeccable. Suit perfectly tailored, expression somber. He wasn't wearing the mask now, but he was wearing another one, the mask of the grieving father. I watched, paralyzed, as he leaned into the microphones. He paused, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. This is the hardest moment of my life. He wiped a non-existent tear from his eye. My son Leo, we've tried to help him. He looked down, shaking his head. We knew he was troubled. We knew he was struggling with substance abuse. We tried to keep it private to protect him. Liar, I whispered. My voice was lost in the traffic noise. Leo has never touched a drug in his life, I screamed at the screen. People on the sidewalk turned to look at me, the crazy woman yelling at the TV. On the screen, Julian continued, his voice dropping to a hush that made the reporters lean in. I am the Attorney General. I stand for the law, and as painful as it is, my son must face the consequences of his actions. I will not protect him from justice. He looked straight into the camera. He looked straight at me. We must pray for the victim, he said. The feed cut back to the news anchor. Attorney General puts duty above family in heartbreaking statement. I fell back against the brick wall of my building. He was destroying Leo. He was painting a narrative of a troubled, drug-addicted kid who finally snapped. He was giving the public a reason to hate our son. And he was doing it while I stood here, with the proof of his guilt taped to my leg, unable to say a single word. I looked at the gag order in my hand. I looked at the dark street. I felt the walls closing in. I was in a cage, but as I watched Julian's face on that screen, the coldness in my chest solidified into something harder. Diamond hard. He thought silence was my defeat. He thought taking away my voice would stop me. He forgot one thing. I didn't need to speak to hurt him. I shoved the papers into my bag. I turned back toward my building. I wasn't going to the DA. I wasn't going to the police. If the law was a trap, then I would have to go outside the law. I walked back into the lobby, my bare feet bleeding, my head held high. I'm Kara Sterling, and I was done playing by the rules. I'm Kara Sterling, 44 years old, and I was standing in a filthy alleyway behind a dive bar, waiting for a man who used to carry a badge before the bottle took it away. The rain was coming down in sheets. It soaked through my torn dress. It plastered my hair to my skull. I was shivering, but not from the cold. I was shivering because the gag order in my purse felt like a loaded gun pointed at my head. I couldn't talk to the press. I couldn't talk to the cops. But the order didn't say anything about talking to a disgraced private investigator who owed me a life debt. I checked my watch. 2:00 a.m. A metal door creaked open down the alley. A figure stepped out into the downpour, lit only by the flickering neon of a beer sign. Miller. He looked worse than I remembered. Gray stubble, hollow cheeks, eyes that had seen too much and slept too little. He didn't have an umbrella. He just pulled his collar up and walked toward me, his boots splashing in the puddles. You look like hell, Kara, he rasped. I feel like it, I said, my voice trembling. I saw the news, he said. Julian is burying the kid. It's a demolition job. I know, I whispered. I have proof, Miller. I have proof it wasn't Leo. But Julian, he gagged me. If I show it, I lose everything. I lose the money to defend Leo. Miller laughed, a dry, hacking sound. You think this is about the money for the defense? He stepped closer. He smelled of cheap whiskey and old tobacco. You really don't see it, do you? He asked. See what? Why Julian is doing this. He reached into his jacket. My heart seized. I thought for a second he was pulling a gun. Instead, he pulled out a tablet protected by a thick, waterproof case. He tapped the screen and shoved it at me. Look at the logistics reports, he said. Your company, Sterling Logistics. I squinted through the rain. It was a manifest. Route 7, the quiet route, the one that runs from the coast up through the mountains. I don't understand, I said. These are standard shipments, auto parts, textiles. Look closer, Miller growled. He swiped to the next image. It was a thermal scan of one of my containers. That's not auto parts, Miller said softly. I stared at the heat signatures. They were dense, small, uniform. Gold? I asked, my stomach dropping. Drugs? Worse, Miller said. Untraceable assets. High-tech components prohibited for export. He's moving black market tech to foreign buyers, Kara, and he's doing it in your trucks. My knees almost gave out. I grabbed a wet brick on the wall to steady myself. He's using my company, I breathed. He's using Sterling Logistics as a mule. He's been doing it for 6 months, Miller said. But the auditors were getting close. You were getting close. You asked for that quarterly review, remember? I nodded numbly. I had asked for that review 3 weeks ago. He needed you distracted, Miller said. He needed you so panicked, so grief-stricken that you wouldn't look at the books. He needed you to drain the company accounts for legal fees so the stock price would tank. The world tilted on its axis. The rain felt like ice water in my veins. The accident, I choked out. Framing Leo. It's a smokescreen, Miller said, taking the tablet back. While you're running around trying to save your son from a murder charge, Julian is finalizing a hostile takeover. He's buying up the devalued stock through shell companies. By the time Leo's trial starts, Julian will own Sterling Logistics completely. I felt like I was going to be sick. I had been playing the worried mother. I had been crying over my son's future. Meanwhile, Julian was playing a corporate long game. He sacrificed our son's life just to steal my company. He framed Leo to keep my eyes off the road. He's going to seize the company, Miller continued, his voice low. Then he'll scrub the records, blame the irregularities on your mismanagement during a crisis, and keep the smuggling routes open. I looked at Miller. He's a monster. He's a businessman, Miller corrected. A ruthless one. He looked over his shoulder, scanning the dark alley. I can't stay. If he knows we talked, I'm dead, and you. He looked at me with something like pity. You're already in the grave, Kara. You just haven't laid down yet. I'm not laying down, I said. The rage was back. But this time it wasn't just about Leo. It was about everything. My blood turned to ice. I realized with a sickening jolt that every check I wrote for Leo's lawyers, every frantic late-night call, every moment of despair had been engineered. I had been funding my son's destruction. I had been handing Julian the keys to my kingdom. Miller started to walk away. Wait, I called out. What do I do? He stopped. He didn't turn around. You can't fight him in court. He owns the court. You can't fight him in the boardroom. He's already rigged the vote. Then how do I fight him? I screamed over the thunder. Miller turned his head slightly. You have to stop playing his game, Kara. You have to burn the board. He disappeared into the shadows. I stood alone in the rain, burned the board. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, but they were strong. I built Sterling Logistics from nothing. I knew every route. I knew every driver. I knew where the bodies were buried because I dug the foundations. Julian thought he could steal my company. He thought he could use my trucks to peddle his filth. I reached down and touched the tape on my thigh, feeling the outline of the SD card. He had the law. He had the money. He had the power. But he was moving his illegal cargo on my roads, and I was about to cause a pile-up. I'm Kara Sterling, 44 years old, and I was sitting in the dark of my high-rise office, dripping wet and shaking with a rage so hot it felt like a fever. The city lights of Seattle sprawled out below me, a grid of gold and white that usually made me feel powerful. Tonight they just looked like prison bars. My clothes were still soaked from the alleyway meeting with Miller. My skin was cold, clammy against the wet fabric of my dress, but my blood was boiling. I stared at the phone on my mahogany desk. It was a silent monolith. I knew Julian was somewhere in this city, probably sleeping soundly in a hotel suite, secure in his victory. He had the perfect plan: frame the son, break the mother, steal the company. I looked at the framed photo on my desk. Leo at his high school graduation, smiling, his arm draped over my shoulder. He looked so light, so unburdened. The phone rang. The sound shattered the silence like a gunshot. I jumped, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stared at the caller ID. Unknown caller. I knew who it was. My hand trembled as I reached out. I hesitated. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to hear his voice, knowing what I knew. Knowing that his own father had sacrificed him for a shipping route. The phone rang again. I picked it up. This is a prepaid call from an inmate at the King County Correctional Facility, the robotic voice droned. To accept this call, press 1. I pressed the button so hard my nail turned white. Leo, I whispered. There was a pause, a heavy, wet breath. Mom, his voice was thin. It sounded like it belonged to a child, not a 20-year-old man. It cracked on the single syllable, carrying a weight of fear that knocked the wind out of me. I'm here, baby, I said. I'm right here. I saw him, Leo choked out, my stomach twisted. Who, Leo? Dad, he said. On the TV in the day room, I saw the press conference. I closed my eyes. Tears leaked out, hot and fast. Leo, don't listen to that, I pleaded. It's just politics. Politics? Leo's voice rose, trembling with hysteria. He said I was an addict, Mom. He told the whole world I was on drugs. He said I need to face the consequences. I know, I said, gripping the phone until my knuckles ached. I didn't do it, Leo sobbed. Mom, I swear to God, I didn't hit anyone. I wasn't even driving that way. I told the cops. I told the lawyer. Why doesn't anyone believe me? I opened my mouth to scream the truth. I believe you. I have the proof. Your father was driving the car. Your father moved your body to the driver's seat while you were unconscious. The words were right there, sitting on my tongue like acid. But then I heard it, the faint, rhythmic beep in the background of the line. This call is being recorded. Julian was the Attorney General. He had access to everything. He would be listening to these tapes. If I told Leo the truth now, if I tipped my hand that I knew about the setup, about the smuggling, about the hostile takeover, Julian would know. He would know I was coming for him. He would accelerate the asset seizure. He would destroy the evidence in the logistics database before I could download it. Or worse, he would make sure something happened to Leo inside that cell before I could get him out. Mom, Leo begged. Why aren't you saying anything? I bit my tongue. Literally. I bit down on the side of my tongue until I tasted the sharp, metallic tang of copper. The pain shot through my jaw, grounding me. I believe you, Leo, I said, my voice sounding strangled. Then get me out, he screamed. Why am I still here? Why did the lawyer say I should plead guilty? You hired him, Mom. Why is he telling me to confess? Because Julian picked the lawyer, because the lawyer is part of the trap. I swallowed the blood in my mouth. We have to be patient, I said. I felt like I was dying. Patient? Leo sounded broken. Mom, they look at me in here like I'm a monster, Dad said. Dad said he wouldn't protect me. Does he think I did it? Do you think I did it? That question was a knife in my heart. He thought I was abandoning him. He thought I was standing with Julian. I wanted to throw the phone through the wall. I wanted to burn the city down. No, I gasped. No, Leo, never. I know you're innocent. Then do something, he cried. Please, Mom, I'm scared. I'm so scared. I am doing something, I said, my voice shaking uncontrollably. I promise you I am fighting for you. It doesn't feel like it, he whispered. The line went dead. The automated voice didn't even say goodbye, just a click, then the dial tone. I sat there holding the receiver against my ear. The silence of the office rushed back in, louder than before. I felt the blood on my tongue. I felt the shame burning my skin. I had let my son think I was failing him. I had let him go back to his cell thinking he was alone in this nightmare. I slowly lowered the phone to the cradle. My hand was shaking so bad I missed the hook twice. I looked at the window. My reflection stared back at me. A woman in a ruined dress. A mother who couldn't comfort her child. A CEO who was being stripped for parts. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a thought. It was a physical break, like a bone fracturing under too much weight. I stood up. I grabbed my heavy leather executive chair. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. I spun around using the momentum of my hips and hurled the chair with every ounce of strength I had left in my body. It flew across the room. It hit the floor-to-ceiling window with a deafening crash. The safety glass didn't just crack. It exploded. Thousands of diamonds rained down onto the carpet. A jagged hole opened up to the night sky. The wind roared into the office, sucking the papers off my desk, swirling them around me like a chaotic snowstorm. I stood in the center of the whirlwind, breathing hard, my chest heaved. The cold wind whipped my hair across my face. I walked to the edge of the broken window. I looked down at the city. Julian was down there. He thought he had won. He thought the grieving mother was broken. I spat a mouthful of blood onto the glass-covered floor. I wasn't broken. I was just getting started. I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk. I opened the bottom drawer. I pulled out a fresh burner phone and the SD card Miller had given me. I wasn't going to call a lawyer. I was going to call the one person Julian couldn't buy, couldn't intimidate, and couldn't silence. I was going to call the union rep for the truckers on Route 7. If Julian wanted to play dirty with my trucks, he was about to learn a hard lesson. You don't mess with the people who drive the wheels. I wiped the blood from my lip. War had been declared. And tonight, the general was taking the field. I'm Kara Sterling, 44 years old, CEO of the largest logistics empire in the Pacific Northwest, and I had just declared war on the Attorney General. The wind was still howling through the shattered window of my office, sending papers swirling into the wet night, but I was no longer standing in the wreckage. I was moving. I took the service elevator down to the basement garage. My heels clicked against the concrete, a sharp military rhythm. I didn't take my luxury sedan. I walked past it to the back of the lot, to an unmarked gray utility van usually used for maintenance. I pulled the sliding door open. Sitting inside, illuminated by the blue glow of 3 monitors, was Marcus. He was my head of fleet operations. He was also the only man in the company who hated Julian as much as I did. Did you find it? I asked, climbing inside and slamming the door against the rain. The air in the van smelled like stale coffee and ozone. Marcus didn't look up from the screens. His fingers flew across a mechanical keyboard. Route 9, he grunted. Just like you thought, the manifesto says it's carrying agricultural equipment bound for the Canadian border. And the weight? I asked. 2 tons lighter than the paperwork claims, Marcus said, finally turning to look at me. And it's off course. The GPS pings are erratic. They're trying to jam the signal, but they're using civilian tech. Amateur hour. I leaned in, watching the red dot moving on the digital map. It was a Sterling Logistics truck. My logo was on the side, my reputation was on the line. But tonight that truck was my weapon. He thinks he's clever, I whispered, watching the dot turn off the highway onto a logging road. He thinks because he controls the local precinct, he can move whatever he wants. He doesn't know about the eyes in the sky, Marcus said. He handed me a controller. The drones are in position. I took the device. It felt heavy in my hands. Launch them, I said. On the center monitor, the view shifted. We were looking down from 500 feet. The thermal imaging turned the world into shades of gray and white. The rain was a blur of static, but the heat signatures were crisp. I saw the truck. It had stopped in a clearing deep in the woods, miles from the nearest way station. 2 other vehicles were waiting, black SUVs. Men were getting out. Zoom in, I commanded. The camera swooped down, silent and invisible in the storm. The image switched to high-definition night vision. I held my breath. I saw the driver of my truck step out. I didn't recognize him. Julian must have planted him, but I recognized the man stepping out of the lead SUV. It wasn't Julian. It was a man named Councilman Reed, Julian's biggest political donor. The man who had funded Julian's campaign for Attorney General. And behind him, men were unloading crates from the back of the SUVs and moving them into my truck. "Are we recording?" I asked, my voice trembling with adrenaline. 4K resolution, Marcus confirmed. Every face, every license plate. We're getting audio too. The drone hovered lower. "Make sure it's secure," Reed was saying, his voice tinny but clear over the drone's directional mic. "Julian says the Border Patrol is paid off for the next 3 hours. If this shipment doesn't cross, heads will roll." "It'll cross," the driver said. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. "No," I said softly, "it won't." I watched as the exchange finished. They shook hands. They thought they were gods. They thought they were untouchable. "Do I call the police?" Marcus asked, his hand hovering over his phone. I reached out and grabbed his wrist. "No," I said. "The local police answer to Julian. If we call 911, the dispatch will alert him before a squad car even starts its engine. The evidence would vanish." "Then what?" I pulled the SD card Miller had given me from my pocket. I slotted it into the van's terminal. "Miller gave me a backdoor," I said. "Direct line to the FBI's Organized Crime Division. No local field offices. Straight to DC." I began the upload. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 10%, 20%. I watched the men on the screen get back into their cars. They were laughing. They were celebrating another successful run. 50%. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. If Julian had a cybersecurity team monitoring the network, they might see this spike. They might trace it back to this van. 80%. "Come on," I hissed. 99%. Upload complete. I hit the enter key. Sent. I sat back, the leather seat creaking under me. "Now what?" Marcus asked. "Now," I said, watching the SUVs drive away on the screen. "We wait for the fire." I didn't have to wait long. I didn't go home that night. I stayed in the van watching the feeds. 2 hours later, the red dot of the truck stopped moving just 3 miles from the border. But it didn't stop because of traffic. The monitor lit up with a swarm of new heat signatures. Fast movers, helicopters. "Federal agents," Marcus whispered, awe in his voice. They didn't even coordinate with the locals, they just swooped in. I watched the takedown in silence. It was brutal, efficient. The driver was on the ground in seconds. The back of the truck was thrown open. Whatever was in those crates, drugs, weapons, cash, it was now federal evidence. And Julian's name was all over the logistics. But the real satisfaction came the next morning. I was back in my temporary office, a conference room on the second floor when the news broke. I turned on the television. Breaking news. Councilman Reed had been arrested in a pre-dawn raid at his estate. Federal charges, racketeering, trafficking. I stood by the window looking out at the gray Seattle skyline. My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. Julian. He never called me during the day. Never. He was too careful about appearances. I let it ring. I watched the vibration dance across the mahogany table. It stopped. Then it started again instantly. He was panicking. His business partners were being snatched off the street by federal agents who didn't care about his local influence. His supply line had been severed. His money train had derailed. I picked up the phone on the fourth ring. I didn't say hello. I just breathed into the receiver. Kara, his voice was tight, strained. The smooth politician's baritone was gone, replaced by the high pitch of a cornered animal. I'm here, Julian, I said, my voice calm, icy. There's been a mistake, he stammered. A mix-up with one of the trucks. I need you to issue a statement. Say it was a rogue driver. Say the company had no knowledge. I smiled. It was a terrifying sensation. But we did have knowledge, Julian, I said. Silence on the line, thick, heavy silence. What did you say? He whispered. I said we knew exactly where the truck was, I replied. We tracked it, we filmed it, and we sent the footage to Washington. I heard his breath hitch. I heard the sound of his world tilting on its axis. You. He couldn't finish the sentence. Kara, do you have any idea what you've done? They'll come for me, they'll come for everything. I know, I said. They'll hurt Leo, he screamed. If I go down, I can't protect him. You weren't protecting him, I snapped, my rage flaring hot and bright. You were using him as collateral. You framed our son to cover your tracks. Kara, listen to me. No, I cut him off. You listen. You told me not to speak to anyone. You told me to stay quiet. I walked to the window. The sun was trying to break through the clouds. I'm done being quiet, I said. Run, Julian, run while you still can. I hung up the phone. My hands were steady. My heartbeat was slow. I looked at the photo of Leo on the wall. Hold on, baby, I thought. Mommy just took out the first domino, but I knew this wasn't over. Julian was wounded. And a wounded predator is the most dangerous thing on earth. He wouldn't just run, he would strike back. And he would aim for the only thing I had left to lose. I grabbed my coat. I needed to get to the prison. I needed to get to Leo before Julian's guards did. I'm Rowan Vance, 44, and I built the largest shipping empire on the West Coast from a single rusty trawler to a billion-dollar fleet. But tonight, I stood in the center of Warehouse 4 with nothing but a fountain pen and a breaking heart. The rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof. It sounded like gunfire. It sounded like applause. I stood next to a folding table I had set up in the middle of the vast, empty concrete floor. On the table sat a stack of legal documents. The transfer of ownership, every ship, every truck, every warehouse. I was signing it all over to Julian. That was the deal we made an hour ago over the phone. My company for my son's life. Or at least that's what he thought. The large bay doors rolled open with a mechanical shriek. The headlights of a black Mercedes cut through the gloom, blinding me for a second. I didn't flinch. I smoothed the front of my trench coat. My hands were freezing, but they weren't shaking. Not anymore. The car stopped 20 feet away. The engine died. Julian stepped out. He looked impeccable, even in the middle of a storm. His suit was tailored, his hair perfect, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. He didn't look like a man whose drug shipment had just been seized by the feds. He looked like a man who had a backup plan, and I was looking at it. Rowan, he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. You picked a dramatic spot for a surrender. He walked toward me, his footsteps confident. He didn't bring guards. He didn't think he needed them. He thought I was broken. He thought I was just a mother who had lost her fight. Just sign the papers, Julian, I said. My voice was low, hoarse. I just want Leo out of prison. I want him safe. Julian reached the table. He looked down at the documents. He ran a finger over the clause that gave him controlling interest of Vance Global. It's a shame it had to come to this, he said, not sounding sorry at all. If you had just stayed in your lane, we could have been quite the power couple. Where is the lawyer? I asked. Waiting in the car, he lied. Sign, and I make the call to the DA. The evidence against Leo disappears. He walks out tonight. I picked up the pen. The metal was cold against my skin. I hovered the tip over the signature line. Julian watched me like a hawk watching a mouse. Do it, he whispered. I hesitated. I let my hand tremble intentionally. How could you? I asked, looking up at him. He's your son, too. Julian laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. He's a disappointment, Julian sneered. Soft, like you. He doesn't have the stomach for the real world. He leaned in closer, his cologne suffocating me. You were always a weak mother, Rowan. You coddled him, you made him vulnerable. I just utilized that vulnerability. There it was, the admission, the insult, the trigger. I looked him dead in the eye. I might be a weak mother, I said, my voice suddenly steel. But I'm a hell of a CEO. I dropped the pen. It clattered loudly onto the table. What are you doing? Julian snapped. I'm not signing, I said. Then Leo dies in there, he roared, his face twisting into a mask of rage. I will have him shanked in the showers before sunrise. I control that prison. No, I said, you don't. I reached into my pocket and pressed a single button on my phone. Click. Suddenly, a voice boomed from the warehouse PA system overhead. It wasn't my voice, it was Julian's. But it wasn't the Julian standing in front of me. It was the audio from the dashcam footage Marcus and I had pulled from the impounded car 3 days ago. The audio filled the warehouse, bouncing off the steel walls at a deafening volume. The kid is clueless. I planted the fentanyl in his gym bag myself. He thinks I'm helping him with his tuition. Julian froze. His eyes went wide. The voice continued, loud and distorted but unmistakable. Rowan is too busy playing executive to notice. By the time she realizes Leo is the fall guy, I'll have the company and the kid will be doing 20 to life. It's the perfect frame. Julian spun around, looking up at the speakers high in the rafters. Turn it off, he screamed. Turn it off. He looked back at me. The arrogance was gone. In its place was pure primal fear. You recorded me, he whispered. You can't use that. It's inadmissible. It's already in the inbox of the special agent in charge, I said. I took a step back. And so are you. Julian reached inside his jacket. He was going for a gun, but he was too late. Boom. The skylights shattered inward. Ropes dropped from the ceiling. At the same moment, the side doors of the warehouse blew open with a concussive blast that shook the floor beneath my feet. FBI, drop it, get on the ground. The shout was a collective roar from a dozen throats. Red laser sights danced across Julian's chest. It looked like a light show. Men in tactical gear swarmed from the shadows, moving with terrifying speed. Julian threw his hands up. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He looked at me one last time as 2 agents tackled him to the wet concrete. His face was pressed against the floor, his expensive suit ruined by the grime of the warehouse I owned. Rowan, he screamed, spit flying from his lips. Rowan, help me, we can make a deal. I walked over to him. I stood over him as the agents cuffed his hands behind his back. The plastic zip ties cinched tight. I leaned down. "Don't speak to anyone," I whispered, echoing the advice his lawyer had given me weeks ago. I stood up and walked away. I walked past the table. I picked up the unsigned contract. I ripped it in half. Then I ripped it again. I let the pieces flutter to the floor like confetti. An agent approached me. "Ms. Vance," he asked. "We have a team at the prison right now. The warden has been taken into custody. Your son is being secured." My knees almost gave out. The adrenaline was leaving my body, replaced by a wave of exhaustion so heavy I could barely stand. "Is he safe?" I asked. "He's safe," the agent said. "He's coming home." I looked back at Julian one last time. They were dragging him toward an armored van. He was weeping. I turned my back on him. I walked out into the rain. The water felt clean. It felt like a baptism. I pulled my phone out. I dialed the number I had been memorizing for 3 weeks. "Hello?" a groggy voice answered. "Mom." I closed my eyes, tears mixed with the rain on my face. "I'm here, Leo," I sobbed. "I'm here and it's over. I'm Rowan Vance, 44, and I just dismantled $1 billion criminal empire to save the only thing that actually matters." The dawn air outside the Federal Detention Center was cold enough to snap iron. I stood by the curb next to my idling SUV. My breath plumed in the gray light. I wasn't wearing my usual tailored armor. I was wearing jeans and an old sweater. I didn't care who saw me. I didn't care about the cameras setting up across the street. I only cared about the heavy steel door 20 yards away. My lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Alina who had worked pro bono for the last 48 hours, stood beside me. "They're processing the release paperwork now," she said softly. The DA dropped everything. The audio recording from the warehouse was the nail in the coffin. I nodded. I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was filled with glass. I kept my eyes glued to that door. Every second felt like a year. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape a cage. "Please," I thought, "just open." Then the buzzer sounded, a harsh metallic grind that echoed through the quiet street. The heavy door swung outward, and there he was, Leo. He looked thinner than he had 3 weeks ago. His gray hoodie was wrinkled. His face was pale, the color of old paper, but his eyes were clear. He stepped out onto the concrete, blinking against the morning light. He looked lost for a split second, then he saw me. "Mom," he cracked. I didn't walk, I ran. I collided with him, wrapping my arms around his shoulders, burying my face in his neck. He smelled like industrial soap and fear, but he was warm, he was alive. He collapsed into me, his tall frame shaking as the sobs finally broke loose. "I've got you," I whispered fiercely into his hair. "I've got you, you're safe, it's over." I held him tight enough to fuse our bones together. I felt his heart beating against my chest. It was the only rhythm that made sense in this chaotic world. "Ms. Vance," Alina said gently, touching my arm. "Look." I pulled back slightly, shielding Leo with my body. I looked toward the side entrance of the building. 2 U.S. Marshals emerged. Between them walked a man who used to own the city, Julian. He wasn't wearing his Italian suit anymore. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His hands were cuffed to a chain around his waist. His ankles were shackled. He shuffled as he walked, the metallic clink 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 of his chains cutting through the morning silence. He looked old. He looked hollowed out. He looked up and saw us. He saw his son free and safe in my arms. He saw me standing tall in the wreckage he had caused. He stopped. The marshals tugged at him, but he planted his feet for 1 second. His eyes met mine. There was no arrogance left, no sneer, just the terrifying realization of a man who had gambled his soul and lost everything. I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I let him see exactly who had beaten him. I let him see the weak mother who had torn his world apart brick by brick. Keep moving, the marshal barked, shoving Julian forward. Julian stumbled. He lowered his head. He was led toward a waiting transport van, a caged animal going to a cage that would never open again. I felt Leo tense up against me. Don't look at him, I whispered, turning Leo's face toward mine. Look at me, he's gone, he's the past. Leo nodded, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. Let's go home, Mom, he said. Yeah, I said, let's go home. We walked toward the car. The sun was finally breaking over the skyline, painting the courthouse in shades of gold and blood orange. I opened the passenger door for Leo. He climbed in, leaning his head back against the seat with a sigh that seemed to expel 3 weeks of terror. I walked around to the driver's side. Before I got in, I paused. I looked back at the courthouse one last time. My life was unrecognizable compared to what it was a month ago. My marriage was a lie. My company was under audit. My reputation was scarred. I had lost friends. I had lost sleep. I had lost my innocence. But as I looked at my reflection in the car window, I didn't see a victim. I saw a survivor. They tried to bury me. They didn't know I was a seed. I had walked through the fire for my son, and I hadn't just survived. I had burned the devil's house down on my way out. I opened the door and climbed into the driver's seat. I started the engine. I reached over and took Leo's hand. He squeezed back. Ready? I asked. Ready, he said. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I only looked forward.